in the special education world, I am an outlier because there's so much paperwork and I love the paperwork. So I realized that I could maybe not help other teachers love the paperwork, but help them learn different ways to manage the paperwork and do it more effectively and efficiently so that they could have more time, not only to build relationships with their students, but also have more time at home so they're taking less work home.
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions, strength-based counseling agency here in Iowa.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am the vice president in charge of our BHIS department at Heart and Solutions. We work with kids ages 4 through 18 on different behavioral skills in home. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
So our guest today is joining us from Florida. She is an educator, a person who likes to educate people and to help people who educate other people. And so I just think that the global reach of being not only the person that's educating children directly or educating people directly, but being that person who's helping educate and guide and support the educators, right? We often ask that question, who's supporting our educators? And hopefully we'll answer that question for you guys today. So we've got Stephanie DeLussey here with us today from Florida. She is a dual certified veteran special education teacher. She is an IEP coach, available for IEP coaching to anybody in the world virtually. She's a children's book author, and she mentors teachers and supports teachers, which is also available to anybody in the world on her website. So welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My first question, and we have so much to talk about, but what is your children's book, or what are your children's books?
Oh, goodness. So we have 2 dogs. Personally, we have a chocolate lab and a wiener dog, and they are just the craziest pair ever. So I self-published 3 books based off of just real life, their journeys. They're called Jackson and Zoe. So Jaxon and Zoe, Zoie. And so Jackson and Zoe go to the beach because we live in Florida. They love it here. They love going to the dog beach. Jackson and Zoe go to school. And then there's Jackson and Zoe get a pool. So those are the 3 currently that we have. Hopefully there will be more in the future.
Oh, that's so cute. Okay, so going over your bio as well, you started as a teacher, I'm assuming, and have kind of transitioned into coaching. So how did you switch from those roles and from teaching to coaching?
Yeah, so I taught in the public charter school setting in multiple states. I've lost count, 4 or 5 different states now. I'm certified in 6 or 7, but I taught in the traditional classroom setting, special education, for 7.5 years. And then I left the classroom mid-year due to my mental health, which we can talk about today. And all the while I was teaching full time, I was also kind of had like a side hustle of writing lesson plans and creating activities, things that I was doing for my own students in my classroom. I would sell them online through an online platform. And so I was really fortunate, one, that we had my husband's job to kind of take care of healthcare and all of that stuff when I left the classroom, but that I also had, this other avenue to kind of help us while I transitioned out of the classroom. I didn't know if I wanted to not be in the classroom anymore or if I just needed to be out of that specific setting in school. But I eventually, through the help of going to therapy and having my own counselor, realized that I don't currently want to be in a traditional classroom setting. And so I realized that in the special education world, I am an outlier because there's so much paperwork and I love the paperwork. So I realized that I could maybe not help other teachers love the paperwork, but help them learn different ways to manage the paperwork and do it more effectively and efficiently so that they could have more time, not only to build relationships with their students, but also have more time at home. So they're taking less work home.
Wonderful. It's using that strength of yours, the part of teaching that not everybody loves, and being able to help people find solutions to that. And you also provide some lessons plans and some original material that special education teachers can utilize in their own classrooms as well. Very exciting. So that's where Mrs. D's Corner started, is from your own lesson plans that you were doing and then making them available to share with other people so that they could be replicated in all different classrooms. Beautiful. So what is IEP coaching?
So IEP in the special education world stands for Individualized Education Program, and those are for our students that have disabilities. And students have to be found eligible through federal law and state laws. And once they're found eligible, they get those special education services. So they'll have their IEP. And so I provide IEP coaching mostly to teachers. I will help parents here and there or point them in the right direction of a friend or other colleague who is also an IEP coach who helps parents and necessarily goes to those IEP meetings with the parents. I stand more with the teacher side of it in collaboration with parents, where I, again, help teachers manage the paperwork, but make sure that they have all the data that they need to write these plans. They know how to write these plans because surprisingly enough, a lot of special education teachers, we aren't taught either through college or our school districts how to write IEPs. We wing it and figure it out on our own. And so I provide that training for them to help them learn how to write IEPs more effectively and efficiently. Again, so they don't have to spend so much time writing them, but that there's still a really solid plan for those students so that they get the education that they need.
What are some of the things that go into an IEP plan? Like, what are the things that are getting written in those then?
Oh my goodness, so many things. So there's a part of the IEP called the present levels of academic and functional performance. And this is essentially the Bible of that child. So you should be able to pick up any child's IEP and read that section of it and know just about everything about that child, what they like, what they don't like, what skills they know how to do independently, what skills they're currently struggling with. And then from there, the IEP team will write IEP goals for that student for that next year. So every year, these students with disabilities and their families and IEP teams are going to have an IEP meeting. And the IEP goals will change every year based off of what they need to be successful in the grade and the classroom that they're currently in. So you have all of that. And then you also have what we call accommodations and modifications. So maybe they need additional testing time. Maybe they need a special device to help them spell words. So maybe instead of writing words, they're typing them out. So lots of different little things, but it's very individualized. And so no two child IEPs are the same or should ever be the same, which makes it even more kind of overwhelming for teachers and parents at the same time.
Yeah, I think that, we hear a lot about how challenging it can be for parents to understand the IEPs and kind of learn the IEPs and all of that and advocate for them. But we don't get to see as much kind of behind the curtain in terms of those challenges for teachers in writing those EAPs and having them be specialized for each student and individualized, but also taking into account the other 20 students that are in that classroom and all of the interactions and relationships between each student and meeting each of their needs and then meeting the needs of the group as well. And so what a great support for teachers to be able to validate that, no, these are challenging things to do. It's challenging for the parents, but it's challenging for the teachers, and being able to offer that support to those schools and teachers is wonderful. So you mentioned your own counseling experience and how that really helped you to kind of form this path into what you're currently doing. Can you tell us more about that experience?
Yeah. So when I left the traditional classroom setting, I was diagnosed with severe anxiety that was related to my job. And looking back now, I can see that it wasn't just like that school year, or though it was coming. Like looking back now where I am, I can see, I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I've always had anxiety. It just manifested in that's where I was in life at that moment. And so I was diagnosed with severe anxiety. And my primary care physician was like, we're going to put you on some medication and you're going to go to therapy. And I was like, I'm not doing either of those things because I'm leaving the classroom. So it's all going to get better. And like, I'm going to be fine. And so for a full year, I kind of ignored my own needs because I thought, well, it's just going to go away. Like I just got anxiety. Like it's just going to go away the same way that I got it. And the following January, so I left in January, the following January, I had a panic attack on my birthday. And my husband was like, I think it's time that you talk to your doctor again about going to therapy or doing something. Like you really do need that. And so I reached out to her and she was like, okay, well, here's your medication and here's the therapist's information. And so I took the medication once and I threw it up, not on purpose. So I kind of took that as a sign. And so I did not take medication from there. I'm not against it. It just wasn't for me. But then I started going to therapy and it was life-changing. At first, though, I didn't tell anybody that I was going to therapy because the stigma around it, I was like, well, I feel damaged. I feel like something is wrong with me. I felt a lot of shame that I had to go to therapy, especially because I was going like every other week when I started. So it started out, I loved it. I've always loved my therapist. I'm very thankful that the therapist that I have, her and I we mesh really well together. And I know that's not always the case, but I also in turn, like with dealing with my own stuff, had to deal with the stigma with family and friends and just the outside world of going to therapy itself.
How was that process of like kind of coming out and telling everyone that you are in therapy? How did that go then?
It was really scary. I'm not even going to lie. I first told my husband, and so my husband and I have a really great relationship. He's very supportive, but I don't know that anyone in either side of our family actively speaks about going to therapy. If they do, I have to this day no recollection of anyone going to therapy, and that's okay. But so telling him, it was really weird because maybe not weird, but it was very daunting after my first therapy session. I remember it vividly. I made him sit down at the kitchen table and I told him about my entire session. And it was so awkward because these were things that I had been feeling for the whole last year, even beyond that, just about myself. And I hadn't shared it with anyone. And it just made me feel really vulnerable. And I could tell he was really uncomfortable with it too. But as we did that after every therapy session. And so that really helped to build that support system at home. And then I remember telling my family and I was just like, yeah, I'm in therapy now. And over time, as I've talked about it more, they're more accepting of it. But I think just the general stigma with society of going to therapy, needing a therapist, going to counseling, there's such a negative stigma with it. I definitely experienced that, not on purpose, just because, again, that's what society tells us, like it's not a good thing. And so the more I've talked about it, though, the more open my family is with it. And when I go back to therapy, I'm currently not in therapy right now. I go back every couple of months as needed. And so when I go back, they're like, oh, that's awesome. That's really good for you. So making them sit and listen to me talk about therapy was really helpful for my situation and getting the support that I needed to go through that and work on myself.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. There can be so much stigma, and you described feeling shame about it or feeling like, oh, am I going to this person to have to be fixed? Am I broken? And those feelings, they can be such a barrier to starting those services. And I love that you're sharing your story and that it took that amount of time from the I love that your story starts with when your doctor said said that, and then the amount of time in between, because that really is so many people's experiences, but we experience it alone. And in your situation, you were experiencing that alone, and you've since brought other people into your experience and built that support. But from the start, it feels like it's just us. It feels like we're the only one doing it, and it's because something's wrong with us and we have to do. And so I love that you are sharing that story, because it really helps normalize that process, right? That it's not always, well, somebody recommended therapy and I was like, yes, let's do this, right? And went and did it. It can take that amount of time for us to be able to go, well, is this situational? Like, is it just because of this family shift that just happened, or is it just because of something that's going on at work, right? Is this something that's going to change as my situation changes? And then giving ourselves that amount of time to experience life without that thing that we think it might be, and then going, oh, I'm still having these symptoms, right? So there's something else happening. It might not be situational. And sometimes we go, well, maybe it's situational, and it ends up being situational. Just able to give yourself that time to experience that, and then no matter what outcome we arrive at the end of that experience, we know now we know, yes, counseling is going to be potentially helpful for me, right? Or no, it's not. And so then we go in, if we say, okay, I'm still experiencing it, that's a lot of great information we can give to our counselor now to say, look, I've ruled out that it was this job situation, or I've ruled out that it was, this conflict I was having with my family. And that gives that counselor so much great information. So I think sometimes there's the shame and stigma of having to go, or feeling like we want to go, or feeling like it might be helpful. But then there's also shame and stigma around not going when we feel like we should go, And so then it's like, sometimes we get into that no when. So I love that you gave yourself the time to process that and to experience things with that in mind. And then we're able to make that decision that you could really believe in. The idea of sitting down with your partner after each session and talking through each session, I have not heard that before, but I love it.
Yeah.
It sounds like it really helped for sometimes saying those things directly to another person is so challenging. But when we can use the lens of, this is what I said to my counselor, or we can, I'll have people tell stories sometimes and they're like, oh, I told my husband this, and then they say the thing. And it always reminds me, like, yeah, it is. It's easier for us to do it in that way. It's why we love to express ourselves through music and art and, other creative means of doing that. And so I just think that's such a great and helpful tool and technique to use. And you acknowledge that, like, that is awkward. That is awkward to think about doing that. And they're uncomfortable, you're uncomfortable, and you're like, I don't know, let's push through and see where we go. And then by pushing through that discomfort, you made the discomfortable things more comfortable just by having more access to them, by having more exposure to those kinds of conversations. And it's beautiful in your story that your support people around you, your family and your friends, the more you talk about it and the more that you're an advocate and you go like, this is helping me, this is helpful to me. The more comfortable that other people are in being able to take that journey themselves when they need it. So it's just beautiful, beautiful advocacy. How would you say that your experience, your own experience with mental health counselor, has impacted your work as a support for special education teachers?
I will, and I always say this when I do trainings, I will never throw anyone else under the bus except for myself. So I'm going to throw myself under the bus here for a minute. So before I was diagnosed with anxiety, I didn't really understand what it meant to have a mental illness. And I'm sure those that are listening have, heard, oh, like I'm just really anxious today. And there's a lot of people who don't know the differences between having like an actual diagnosed anxiety disorder and just being stressed or anxious for, a day or two. And so I didn't know that difference. And I guess I could say I would just kind of brush it off when I would hear other educators, because surprisingly, a large percentage of educators have anxiety and mental health things going on, whether diagnosed or not. Like there really is. And so I will just I probably brush it off more than I should have. And then once being diagnosed with severe anxiety myself and going through my own healing and all of that, I feel much better about being able to help other teachers through, I don't want to say their problems, but through things that they're dealing with, even if it's not anxiety related, because I understand where those stressors come from, where those anxieties come from. And I know what it's like to have two voices in your head. And so I think it just makes it a lot easier for me to relate to other teachers and, let them know that I get it. It's not just the stress of the job. It's a lot more than that. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's how it's helped me.
What are some, if teachers do seek you out to help with teacher mentoring and to help with those stressors, what are some resources or what can they expect from that then?
Yeah, so it really depends on what they're looking for. And in special education, because there's such a wide variety of needs based on student needs, it really depends on what they need. And so it could just be, I need help with planning this lesson, or I have this topic coming up where I want to teach about, let's just say they're teaching about butterflies. What do you have that I can use, print, and adapt for my third grade class that's self-contained for butterflies? So it may just be something more simple like that. And it may be more in terms with, I have never gotten IEP training before. Where do I start? And so I will kind of guide them through, here's the intentional IEP. We have lots of trainings inside of our membership there. And here's kind of the path that you should take. Here's where you should start. And then as you're going through those, if you have questions, let me know. So it really depends on the teacher's need and what they specifically and individually need for their classroom.
I love the butterfly lesson example. It reminds me of, we did that in second grade. And we hatched a butterfly. I don't know if that's the right word. But we watched it turn from a caterpillar into a chrysalis, into a butterfly. And I told my daughter that story one time. She's in first grade. I told her one time that story. And she now insists that if they don't do that in second grade, that we have to do it at home. So I might have to look up that kind of activity. Yes, for myself, get some lesson plans on that. I think that your approach to supporting teachers and using your own experience with supporting your own mental health and then using that to be able to support teachers, it really, I think, validates the perspective of teachers as humans, because very often I think in our society, teachers and firefighters, right, and police officers, there are kind of these roles in our societies that are so important for our communities, but that there tends to be a little bit less individualization when it comes to how we think about those positions. And so, I might know a police officer, right? And so I can see that person as a human. But when I think about the police or the fire department, right, or the teachers, there's kind of this overall, because the role is so clearly defined, I think, in our minds in terms of what it means for society. So being able to think of, it's like, when we were kids and we would see a teacher out at the park with their own kid, we're like, that's my teacher. What are you doing with this other child? Or we would see them at the grocery store. It's like, are you buying eggs? Right? Like, just
don't you live at the school?
Yeah, don't you live at the school? Like, what are you doing outside of the classroom? And so, we kind of have these ideas of what teachers should be and need to be. And then I feel like what you're doing is really validating that, like, teachers are human beings.
Mhm.
Special education teachers are human beings. And so as human beings, we have our own challenges and we have our own mental health challenges as well. And those things do come into our classrooms. They do affect how we process our work. They affect how we perform our work, and just the awareness of that and the validation of, I'm allowed to be a human. Even though I'm a special education teacher, I'm allowed to be a human. And so I'm allowed to have reactions to things. I'm allowed to have feelings about certain pieces of my job that are challenging to me personally, because of my skill set, right? And I'm really great at the one-on-one with kids, right? But the lesson planning, I'm like, oh, I dread it. And so I think that just being able to use your own experience and the way that you have been able to turn yourself from somebody who was scared of counseling or was, like, nope, not doing that. I'm not doing that. That's not happening. To go from that kind of perspective on it to being able to be a person who's like, I'm telling everybody that I'm in counseling because everybody needs a counselor, and can benefit from that kind of support. Even teachers, even police officers, even firefighters, we're all humans. And so I love that kind of differentiation between, like, no, you're a human, you're going to have human experience. I think it's really, really great. And then it sounds like you just got a lot more information about mental health diagnoses kind of in general. So by learning about yours, being able to go, okay, I understand kind of more about what this means to have a diagnosis. And so then when we're hearing things like, oh, I'm so anxious, or I have anxiety today, or oh, I'm so depressed today, right? Or this weekend, or whatever it is, being able to go, oh no, but I know what a panic disorder feels like. And it doesn't mean I have a test on Monday, like, and I'm worried about it this weekend, right? Like, that's not what a panic disorder or what a panic attack feels like. And that's not what panic disorder feels like. But oftentimes when we haven't experienced a panic attack, it's difficult to understand what that really feels like. Just like if we've never had a heart attack, it's difficult to understand and really, and people will say, oh, you gave me a heart attack. But if you haven't experienced a heart attack, you don't have that understanding when you're using that expression. So I think it's just such a great point about, generalized anxiety disorder versus panic disorder. And the differences between those are just not very often understood until we really either experience it or somebody we love experiences it, or we go into that process ourselves to learn more. So I think it's beautiful because by doing that for those teachers, you're then allowing them to look at each student as like, okay, this is a student in my class, so they're one of 24 kids, but they're also a human. And so, they're having their own challenges as well in that classroom. So it's beautiful how you've been able to, again, like, increase that sphere of influence from those 24 kids you might have originally had to, potentially hundreds and thousands of kids that are being taught every year by the teachers that you're coaching. So I think it's beautiful. So you also had talked about we talked about Mrs. D's Corner. And so that's online at mrsdscorner.com. And then the intentional IEP is that, can people do one-on-one coaching with you where they're meeting with you every week over the computer? How does that work?
So I don't do specific one-on-one coaching. We do more of I provide trainings that are pre-recorded, and you can watch them anytime inside of our membership at the Intentional IEP. But I always am available, via email to help anyone. I get a lot of DMs on Instagram and Facebook to help with that. We have a Facebook group as well. And so I help in all of those different avenues. And because I'm readily available through those avenues, I don't necessarily do one-on-one coaching, but I try to help as much one-on-one as I can in my inbox or DMs or the Facebook group or things like that. But I provide more specific training that teachers can do whenever, wherever, from wherever, with those pre-recorded trainings.
Awesome. And you mentioned that you help teachers work with students with disabilities as well and coming up with lesson plans for them. So what are some of those common disabilities that teachers are seeing with students in their classrooms?
Yeah. So under the federal law, there are 13 different disability categories, but that doesn't mean there are only 13 disabilities out there in the world. There are so many. One of the biggest ones that we're seeing a lot of right now is autism. Mm-hmm. So a lot of students that are autistic, they'll have IEPs and they are in those special education classrooms, whether they're in the general education classroom with special ed teacher support, or they're in, a special education classroom and go out to gen ed for inclusion. So autism is one that we see a lot of ADHD. There are executive functioning, sensory processing is another big one that we see a lot of right now that I'm hearing a lot about as well. And then you have OHI, which is other health impairment, which is typically what ADHD falls under. And then it just really, Down syndrome is one, but then beyond that, their students can have multiple disabilities within one. So a student may have difficulties with orientation and mobility, so getting around, but also maybe have autism and ADHD at the same time. You have Prader-Willi syndrome, you have cerebral palsy. So there's such a wide array of disabilities that a student could have or that a teacher might see in their classroom. But I would say definitely the number one disability that we're seeing right now in classrooms that teachers are asking for help with is autism. And then there are a lot of behaviors that we're seeing in the classroom right now that may or may not be due to the child's disability, but behaviors are a big one that we're seeing in the classroom right now with students with disabilities and without. So just across the board, behaviors are a big thing right now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We do an in-home behavioral health service, and we get so many referrals from teachers because, teachers you're with that student for 8 hours a day. And, you really get to see those behaviors and how those students are interacting with other people. And it's so difficult for a teacher who has 24 students to be able to go, okay, this is symptomatic. This is a social skill. This is a behavioral skill, right? Versus this is a disability or a challenge area for this student. And being able to untangle, right, that whole web of the classroom. It's challenging sometimes even for mental health counselors and behavioral health counselors to create those treatment plans, that are individualized for each of our clients. And we've been to school to learn about these mental health diagnoses, right? And so for a teacher who's been to school to learn how to teach, that is, like you said, sometimes it must feel like being kind of learning on the go and being kind of out there alone. So what a great service for that skill. And I love that you specialize for the teachers and that you've got kind of a companion or a equivalent service with your friend that does that support for the parents. I think that is so helpful because both sides are so valid and both sides are so challenging, that being able to say, oh no, I don't do that kind of support for parents, but here is a person who does, I think is so helpful. Do they have a website, or where could parents go to look into services like that?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of IEP coaches that are out there for parents. And I don't have necessarily one person that I refer to all the time, because a lot of my friends who do IEP coaching on the parent side, they'll specialize in, like I have one friend who specializes in autism and ADHD. And then I have another friend who specializes in like sensory processing. So very specific things. So if a parent reaches out to me and they're like, hey, my child is 9 years old and they have this disability and I need help with this, and I really need someone to like read over the IEP and come to the meeting with me, I'll reach out to my friend and be like, hey, do you have the capacity to take on, this family? And if she does or he does, then I will say, hey, I don't currently offer this support for parents, but I have a friend, here's their contact information. And so I'll send them over there, and I'm like, they'll take really good care of you. But if you need anything else, just let me know. So I always try to if I'm unable to help a parent, I always try to find another avenue of support for them to get the help and services that they need for their child and for themselves.
And you mentioned too, with your own counseling experience, you've kind of like taken a break from counseling, and sometimes you go back after a couple of months. How do you know when it's a good time to like not be going every other week like you were versus when you need to start seeing her again?
Yeah, so I started going to my therapist in 2018, I think, in January of 2018, I believe it was. Maybe it was 17, I don't remember. But I've gone back to therapy 4 or 5 times now. And so when I first started going, it was every other week. And then my therapist would say, I think we're good to start, once a week or once a month rather. And then we started going bi-weekly. And then I graduated, air quotes, from therapy quite a few times, to where I felt like I could handle life on my own without my therapist because of the strategies that she had taught me going through therapy. And so I would do life on my own without my therapist for quite a while. I think the longest time that I went was maybe a year or two. And then life things happen, or a trigger will come up and it'll send me spiraling. And it's something that I know that I can't work through on my own. And so I'll reach out to my therapist and be like, hey, can I get in? And she always fits me in. And so I'll go back to therapy for however long it takes to work through whatever that trigger was or whatever I'm going through. And then we'll, air quotes, graduate from therapy again. But I always know that if I need her, I can just send her an email and she'll fit me into her schedule. And so that just makes me feel really good about not only doing life on my own, I guess, without my therapist, but just knowing that she's always there if I do need her. And I don't have to do life alone. Like if I really need her or someone, she's there, but that she has taught me the strategies to where I can do life alone without her.
Absolutely. It's similar to physical therapy. If we are having certain pains, or if we've gotten into an accident or had a fall or something, and we go to physical therapy, or had a surgery, right? And we go to physical therapy, and they're not there to make us do the exercises. They're there to teach us the exercises, and then we do them at home. And then, if something else does happen, if we're doing the exercises and all of a sudden, when I do that exercise, that doesn't feel good on my back, right? Or when I do that exercise, I hear this horrible crunching sound, then we go back and we adjust, and they take that feedback of what we were doing on our own at home with those exercises they taught us, and then they help us to adjust based on how that's going. And very similarly with counseling, there's a quote that says, counseling is not paying somebody to care about you. It is paying somebody to teach us how to care about ourselves. And that's so true. And I think that's such a great example that you're providing of, yeah, I have that relationship. That counseling relationship is so important. And sometimes that counseling relationship, and just knowing that I have that counseling relationship to go to when I need to make adjustments, or when I need to retune certain things that I'm doing, then then you've got it there. And all because you went and saw her the first time, and started out that relationship. So I just think that is so beautiful. You also talked about, the kinds of responses that you got when you first started talking about counseling or going to counseling. What would you suggest for somebody who maybe their family member or their friend tells them, or their spouse tells them, I'm starting counseling, I'm going to counseling? What kinds of supportive responses do you think that people can provide?
I think the biggest thing when it comes to, if somebody comes to you and is saying, I'm starting therapy, know that them sharing that with you is very vulnerable of them. They're being very open, and they're looking and seeking out your support, and knowing that you are there for them to go through that process. Whether or not you agree with therapy or think it's a good idea or whatever it may be, just being that support system for that person. And how that looks is going to probably be different for every person, depending upon what they need and all of that. But just being open to allowing this person to experience therapy, and not kind of, how do I want to word this? Shadowing their experience with too much positivity or even negativity. Just allowing them to have their own experience, and you just being a support system for them and their experience in going through therapy.
Mm-hmm. I love that, being able to be a supportive neutral. Because when we get the reaction of like, oh, good, I'm so glad you're going to therapy, right? Like, there's a little bit of stigma with that response as well, that like overly positive, like, oh, finally, okay, good. So that kind of overly positive response, and then also that well, is that a good idea kind of response, right? And just being able to show support neutrally, and that's a hard thing to do. But I like that you are opening that door to. It doesn't have to be. They're not asking for your opinion on what it is, and so even if you don't agree with counseling as a practice, even if you are scared yourself of going to counseling or what that means, or if you experience shame, like, oh no, my child needs counseling, did I mess that up? And all of those things that kind of come with that, even if we're experiencing that as that support person, that we can still say, oh, like, how is that going? Right? Those open-ended questions are just so helpful and supportive. It makes me, when you said, even if the person, even if we as the support person, if we don't agree with what's going on, or if we're not particularly even interested, and we wouldn't ever do it ourselves, it reminded me of my little great niece. When she was like 6 or 7, she was obsessed with Pokemon Go, like obsessed with, like, everywhere we would go, she'd have like her Pokemon Go thing, and she'd be like, there's a Pokemon right there. There's a Pokemon right there. And I could not care less about Pokemon, right? But I didn't want to be like, oh, well, I don't care. Right? So being able to say like, oh, what does that one look like? It allows us to be supportive, because I love that she loves something. And if we can just find that piece of it that we can get behind, right? Even if I'm afraid for my sister, partner, whoever, even if I'm afraid for them as they go through this, that I can enjoy the fact that they are trying something new, that they are reaching out for help to help themselves, that they're brave enough to do that. And if we can find those pieces that we can really, really get behind, even if we're like, I would never go play Pokemon Go, we can still get into that, right? Like, oh gosh, she's like walking all over the place now. She's so active because of it, right? And all of those things that we can kind of look at those strengths of it. So I think that's beautiful as well. So if you could give one suggestion to somebody who might be on the fence about starting counseling, what suggestion might you give to that person?
Go. just go. And I know in my own experience, like I waited a really long time to even begin. So if you are feeling like, oh, nope, that's not for me. Like, that's not what I signed up for. Like, not for me. Give yourself time to process that and know that maybe in your current season of life, it's not for you, or it's not for this current season of life. Just keep it in the back of your mind and know that it's always an option, and that there's nothing wrong with going to therapy. It makes you so incredibly strong and brave as a human being in going to therapy and asking for help when you need it. Like, that is probably one of the most courageous things that you could do as a human being, is ask for help when you need it. So keep that in the back of your mind, and just know that there might be a stigma with going, but at the end of the day, you're doing something to help yourself, and you're doing something to better yourself. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm Stephanie DeLussey, and I need a counselor.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 800-531-4236. And if you're a provider seeking play therapy CEUs, you can find us on patreon.com/youneedatraining. We'll see you for the next episode, Sunday at 5.